One of the things that really hurt Apple was after I left, John Scully got a very serious disease.
Don't get personal because you didn't do your work.
Tell all these other people, here's this great idea, then of course they can go off and make it happen.
So now this is my fault?
And that disease, I've seen other people get it too. It's the disease of thinking that a really great idea is 90% of the work.
I give you money, you give me ideas.
As you evolve that great idea, it changes and grows. It never comes out like it starts because you learn a lot more as you get into the subtleties.
That's what the money is for!
The problem with that is that there's just a tremendous amount of craftsmanship in between a great idea and a great product.
It's your job. Everything to you is an opportunity. And you should be thanking me every morning when you wake up, along with Jesus, for giving you another day.
If that's what you do, fuck you. Seriously, fuck you.
As per my last podcast with your host, Greg and Aaron.
It's actually, so it's funny. We were talking before about social media, right? And I saw this thing, and I don't know. We were talking about how you go through reels, and I doom scroll all the time, right? And I find, either it's like fatherhood stuff or sports or whatever. And this one is so cool. And you can't even see it visually, but this guy, it's over in Thailand, and they allow you to essentially create clay statues of somebody that you might hate, and then you get to punch the shit out of it.
Oh my God, that sounds amazing.
Awesome. It's literally, you see these, and I mean, mine wouldn't look anything like this, but I guess it's an art class. You kind of carve it out, and it's like a solid, it looks like one of those punching dummies or whatever. And you see these people just punch it, and the jaw kind of just goes unhinged or whatever. And a lot of the time they say it's like somebody's boss or whatever it might be. I'm like, oh, it's fucking awesome.
I mean, is it me, or is that like an awesome use of AI? Like, if you could create one of these like weird VR video games where you're like, punching people and doing Street Fighter and shit, except the person you're fighting is like your boss, or you could like upload a photo, like make it this person.
Like, well, it depends on your school of thought, right? You think about video games and people go, well, this is why there's all violence in America, because you're out there just shooting people. But in the game, you look at it where you see like a game like Grand Theft Auto, and you're out you get all the aggression and bad shit out in a video game as long as you don't have to in real life. So you're like, yeah, fuck this guy. I'm going to steal his car and I'll shoot him in the head. And you're like, yeah, take that, stupid fucking video game person. But it's as long as you don't bring it to the real world.
Well, that's it. Like the next time somebody cuts me off, I'm just like, okay, I'll go home and shoot them in the virtual head. So I don't need to do it out here.
Imagine that the whole game is just AI superimposes like your boss's face or somebody that you fucking can't stand. You're just out there just like mowing them down with all these
Dude.
and shit.
Oh my God. Like it's a zombie apocalypse with like 70,000 of your boss coming at you, like slowly trying to kill you. And
that would, that's crazy, because it would be a weird level of anxiety because there's that many of them coming at you. And you could barely emotionally handle one. Could you imagine thousands? And then you're killing them, but like, they don't stop.
I know. There's something like a perfect metaphor in that too. I keep shooting them, but they don't die.
Don't die. God, it's just like real life.
Honestly, dude, get rich quick scheme. Now I just got to figure out how to get AI to write that program for me, and we're good.
So I know we talk a lot about technology, and we talk about AI and ChatGPT and all these. I didn't realize how in-depth ChatGPT. Like normally you sit there and you're like, yeah, write this email or write write my year-end review for me using these key terms or whatever, or my resume. Like they're very like simple prompts. But I didn't realize it does art, graphics, and all that shit too.
Yeah. And there's a lot of other ones that do too, like the Gemini Google one does, and what is it, Claude or something? I don't know. There's a shitload of them that are all popping up now.
Well, there's a new. I was reading this random Reddit sub, and it was talking to. I'm always trying to figure out, because I don't understand. I'm financially illiterate. Like I know enough, but not enough to become like super wealthy off of day trading or options trading or anything like that. I know enough. Put it in an ETF and watch it compound and grow, but you need 25 years to do that. I'm already kind of like at the end of the runway, not so much the beginning. So, um,
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think the
maybe not.
secret behind all that is that nobody is like, it's
Yeah.
just once you get big enough, you can convince rich people to give you their money, and then you can, you know, use that to make money. But there is no secret sauce.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, well, the secret sauce is time, right? Compounding
Right.
time and
Yeah. So Warren Buffett always said.
yeah, just wait. And over time, like Warren Buffett, I think isn't he like 50 something years old when he started making his first million? It took him a while to get there, but then once you get to that million, it's quickly becomes two,
Right.
sixth and eighth, and it all happens. I mean, you gotta have some luck along the way. But long story short, I was getting at like one person posted the other day, it was like, what are some up and coming stocks or stocks that are maybe established that people should be investing in? That you may not that may be undervalued at this given point in time. And one person said Google. And I was surprised by that because I know they just recently did a stock split so they could sell more shares. And it's more, I think at the time it was like $99 a share, which is like almost impossible to get into like the Google world with that at that price.
Hmm.
But I was like, oh, what does Google have going on? And we talked about the last time that remember that you were like, oh, that autonomous driving machine, it's called Waymo. And
Waymo. Right.
I didn't realize that's a Google company.
Oh, I didn't know that either.
Yeah,
That's
so
interesting.
Google, it's a subdivision of Google and it's part of their like autonomous machine learning. And they're really pushing that in a lot of these cities to be more capable of doing all that. And then I guess they have like a new program called like VE3 or something like that. And I think it's AI on steroids.
Hmm.
So they're really obviously you can't fuck around with Google. They seem to always come out on top. So I don't
Yeah,
know.
I mean, I can imagine that there's a pretty good synergy to be found if you slapped one of those Google Earth or Google Maps cameras on top of that Waymo machine, and they're just constantly remapping, these cities that seem to change most often, and they're getting you to pay for it. That makes sense. That's a clever
That's the
kind
best
of
part. Yeah.
solution.
The best part is when somebody else pays for it. That's that's the key.
Yeah, somebody else pays for it. You don't have to hire somebody to help you with it. It's like the best of all business worlds. It's just the only people it fucks over is people. So
Yeah, I saw,
perfect.
I talk about this pretty much almost every podcast that we have is really like
Mhm.
following layoffs or one of those. And one person they had in Reddit, they were like, it's the death of tech. And somebody lost their job, right? And obviously the tech sector has been taking the biggest hit because of everything that's been going on, because technology is essentially replacing humans. But this person was angry. They're like, I can't believe that they could do all this in a quick amount of time, and it takes me this amount of time, and blah 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 blah. And then they're like, they really need to put laws in place to to prevent this type. And I'm like, I talked about that in our last podcast. Like, you should
Oh
listen.
yeah. Well, it's funny, one of the last podcasts we had, I think you had mentioned the layoffs that are taking place at the company Klarna. I don't know if you recall that. But what I just read this morning that, I thought was hilarious is that Klarna is now openly saying, we fucked up. Like we laid off way too many people. And now they're desperately hiring customer service people back because I don't know if you know anything about Klarna, but apparently what they do like fancy version of layaway, like so they let people buy stuff now and pay it off later, like a credit card.
They started coming about like a lot of those companies. Klarna, they have a competitor. I can't remember, not Clover, but Clover's are the machines themselves. But I started seeing a bump in those type of quote unquote layaway companies, and it reminded me
Mm-hmm.
of back in the day when my parents would go shopping. They're like, "Oh, put it on layaway," because they didn't have it then.
Totally.
They're shopping at like fucking Caldor or whatever the place was at the time.
Yeah.
And I was like, uh-oh, that's not a good, and I'm not an economist by any stretch of the imagination, but I was like, that's not good when these companies are popping about, because that means people are overextending themselves.
Yeah.
Like
That
they're,
or
because you're
how
also
about
paying interest.
the payday loan companies, like all these online banks and stuff that are like, oh, we'll let you get your paycheck like a few days in advance, or we'll even give you an advance on your paycheck, if we see that you've had it X amount of time, and
Cash those are
yeah, man.
down in bad neighborhoods, but now when you're doing it online, perfectly fine. Yeah,
Exactly. It's legitimized.
you
Yep.
only take 10% off the top, so you're not really getting everything that you're owed, but hey,
Well, that's the thing. When there's no physical presence, it really takes away how shady it used to feel to walk by the pawn shops and the check cashing places and all that to get those payday loans.
but and those are like all of those economically are giant red flags to me, and it makes me very nervous because obviously people are living well beyond their means. It's a prime example in the real
Mhm.
estate market where people are paying, 2 to 3 times what a home is quote unquote really valued at. And really somebody's argument could be, well, it's whatever somebody's willing to pay for it, that's the value of it. It's like yes and no. And then that all comes
Right.
with the interest rates banging you over the head. So yeah, I think it's all a recipe for disaster. I don't know if I could time it, obviously I would be very rich. I wouldn't be in this position that I'm in now. But there's stirring fear of all this. I feel like a lot of people that enter the workforce are like, well, I'll just make more money. I'll get 3% or I'll get a raise or I'll get that. And I'm like, yeah, but you can't start spending the money before you have it. And I feel like a lot of people are starting to do that. And then a lot of people sit there and they're like, oh, well, I need to have this car. Do you really need to have that car? Or
No.
no, you don't. Like you need a car, but not that car, right? You don't need to go
Right.
and buy, a souped up Lexus SUV that's $90,000. Like you could live within your means, you could get a Toyota and be perfectly fine, and it could be
Yeah. But Jeff, my neighbor, got the $70,000 one and really fucked that guy. So I need the $90,000 one.
Dude, it's keeping up with the Joneses.
Yeah,
I
man.
don't know. Have you watched the new show, Friends and Neighbors with John Hamm?
I haven't seen it yet. No, I saw it's on Apple TV though, I think, right?
Fantastic show. Like,
Yeah.
it
All
was,
right.
essentially it takes place in Westchester County. Very similar, like all stuffy upper crust, suburban folk,
Sure.
all the shit that goes on with them, but the excess and wealth and just the sake of having to keep up with the Joneses. And then there's, I
Hmm.
don't want to ruin anything, but there's a lot that kind of goes into it. And his life isn't a disarray, but like just how everybody's kind of incestuous and tied together in some shape or form. But there's that whole keeping up with the Joneses aspect of things that I thought generationally, like the newer generations were like, fuck this, because like I didn't think they cared as much for like brands and things. I thought it was more about experiences, but I guess I'm wrong. I don't know.
I don't know, dude. I think that the experience side of it was a thinly veiled version of the same thing. Because it's like if you look at the experiences of these people that claim to not give a shit about things, these are generally VIP multi-million dollar experiences too. They're like, oh, I'm not into material things. So I just took 6 months off to hike the Andes. Like, how the fuck do you get 6 months off, bitch? Like, you had lots of material things to do
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Or mommy
you
and
know?
daddy that are kind of,
Well, that's
allowing you.
it, right?
Yeah.
That's a perfect segue actually to something I thought of when you were talking about the investment earlier. Have you ever heard of I think his name's Robert Kiyosaki. He wrote the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Yes, he actually is featured in a lot of like we talked about like Instagram posts and things like that. But
Okay.
I've read Rich Dad Poor Dad. It's a very interesting approach, despite the fact that I think financially I think he's not doing so well. But anyway,
Well, yeah, so that's what I think is kind of funny. So I learned a lot from that book. I like the way that it kind of dumbs down a lot of what, ultimately the way to make money is simple. It's just not easy. And at least he was able to explain the simple parts, but to me at least. But what I found interesting is he just came out with something recently where he was like, I not only think we're going to have a recession, I think we're going to get into one of the worst fucking depressions of ever. He's like, I think 1930s wasn't shit. He's like, so the best thing you could do right now is take all your money out and put it into silver, gold, or crypto. And he's like, I think Bitcoin is going to go up to $1 million per coin in the next couple of years. Cause he's like, AI is going to take over, all the globalization is just going to make things worse. Automation is going to take the rest of the jobs, doom, 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 doom. And to your point, it is kind of funny hearing it come from him since, I'm not sure that his rich dad, poor dad methodology has really yielded a lot of rich dad for him in recent memory. But I do feel like that's all you hear, right? Is like, oh, AI is going to do all these awful things and automation is going to do all these awful things. And, then you hear that stuff about it, the guy from Klarna. And I feel like that's kind of the truth of the matter is that I think the rich would love to believe that they could just so easily replace people with AI or, things like that, or replace the manufacturing with automation. But ultimately, you need people to be involved because they're going to have to interact with the other people that buy the stuff. And, is this going to maximize our efficiency to be able to produce more? Yeah. And I think that could be cool. Like maybe this is how we end up being able to build way more housing for people and like do other shit for cheap that we've always been like, we would love to do that, but it's so much money. It's like, well, what if we can do it for mad cheap now? Because AI does have to work, right? Like, but you don't
Got to be
hear
a
that
fine
part of it.
balance, right? You got to find a balance between
Right.
the technology. Like you need doers. I don't care like what anybody says. You need people. You need people to do it, whether it's the programming of AI, automation, whatever. But like the shift in skill will essentially change.
Yeah.
But it's not going to be an end all be all. And Klarna is a perfect example because they probably sat there and they're like, we'll get rid of all the what they view as low hanging fruit, which is probably the people that were doing
It
90%.
was the exact phrase he used.
Did he really? Oh,
Yeah.
man, I should fucking work for Klarna.
Right.
And yeah, so okay, they get rid of all that, right? But that's 90% of the people that are actually doing the work. So then you're stuck with a lot of middle management who are like, oh shit, I can't delegate to anybody. There's nobody left. Like I don't know what the fuck I'm doing because I just got in this position because I knew Steve and Bob, because we play golf together. I
Right.
do this, and then you're stuck with the executive leadership. And not to take anything away from people that get to that level, but at the end of the day, they're so far removed from the everyday aspect of life that
Right.
the only thing they worry, like the only thing that they care about is the information being fed to them so they could spit it out to the board of directors so they could say,
Exactly.
yeah, we're all doing okay, we're good. And if we're not doing good, like I'm the face that you could fire. And the problem is
Mhm.
when you remove all the doers, you're stuck with a lot of like a lot of the people that are sitting there like, which way is up? I don't know
Well, the
anymore.
funny thing is, I feel like a lot of that stuff would be easier to automate than a lot of the stuff closer to the bottom. And like one of the things Klarna is finding out now is that they're actually seeing negative impacts to their business because people aren't paying back the loans. And not because they don't have the money, but because they're like, I don't understand how to work your newfangled, app here. And they got no people for them to call and help them out. And these are people that are like, I don't know how to text. I'm not trying to like chat bot with somebody, like, you know. So then Klarna's out all this money for these things they're letting these people buy, and the people have every intent to pay them back, but they can't. They can't figure it out. And
Well,
Klarna got rid of all the
that
people to help them.
and breach a contract with having to get lawyers involved and paying a premium to get lawyers involved to have to chase down these people. And
Right.
if it's like any company I work for, they're not hiring lawyers to chase after the guy who owes you $1 million. It's the guy that owes like $8.26. And they're like, well, that's the one we have to go after. I'm like,
Right.
is the billable hours of $500 for this top-notch law firm really worth the $8.26?
It's
But they know they
exactly
can
it.
win that in a case because they're not going to lawyer up and be able to fight back.
Well, right. It's guaranteed $8. But I mean, I think that's what Klarna is ultimately realizing is I could pay somebody $8 an hour to talk to that $8 person. And then, they could keep getting all this money in and we wouldn't have to pay any lawyers. And, it reminds me of a company I used to work for that specialized in POTS telephone lines. Right. And I remember when I first started there, this was like about over a decade ago now. I was thinking like, man, what have I gotten myself into? Like, I feel like I just joined like a horse carriage company, right? As Ford created the Model T, right? Like this is a giant fucking waste of time. But the reality of it is that people didn't know, and nor were they spending the time or money to figure out how to replace those telephone lines. So when this company made it easy for them to keep them and then consolidate the billing for them and find discounts for them to keep the lines, it was kind of like, why change? And I think there is a side of AI that people aren't seeing that is going to be, number one, it can do a lot of things to help you. It doesn't have to just like replace your workers. But number two, a lot of companies and industries and parts of the world are just going to be like, eh, like it ain't broke, you know?
Nobody wants to change unless they have to. Like unless
Right.
it's absolutely inevitable. And I've heard people use that term before, like before you have to. No,
Yeah, I've heard that too.
that's status. Like everybody's out there like, nah, we like status quo. And if it's
Yeah.
not really affecting your bottom line in the grand scheme of things, if you could continue to do, if you're able to have a business that can sustain this, doing the same inputs, outputs for 100 plus years, people would take that in a heartbeat, you know, but there's a lot of pressure from publicly traded companies. I mean, private companies have a little bit more leeway. Everybody's beating to the drum of profitability, but you know, the inevitable change, like if they don't have to fire hundreds and hundreds of people because companies have press, uh,
Hmm.
they won't, you know, they'd rather have two people having to do it. You know, transportation's a prime example, you know, like some of the strongest unions available are like the transit and places like that.
Great example.
And they don't want to change shit. Like, yeah, could you go out there and figure out a way to not have a piece of fire that may flame out and freeze your fucking rails together? Yeah, they probably could, but guess what? It's worked for 100 plus years. Why change it now? You know, is there
Dude,
materials that
Boston still use the same, they still use the same DC current electrical system for all of the fucking MBTA subway. It's the like only one still using it, I think, in the world at this point.
they don't change unless they have to? You know,
Why
like
change?
you have a conductor out there punching holes in a ticket. You know, you'd think that that would be numero uno, you know, to change.
Right.
They don't. You know, it's I think about like the New York City subway system and everybody sits there and you like, you know, being a commuter on the Long Island Railroad, I sit there and I'm like, all right, well, you have zones for me, right? If I'm coming from Montauk, they're not paying the same amount as somebody coming from the middle of the island or, you know, west of
Right.
the island to get into the city. And that's usually what it is. It costs more fuel, it costs more bodies, it costs more maintenance to be further away and have to bring you in, whatever it might be, right? And
Mhm.
then I think about New York City subway, and you could literally be in the Nassau Queens border, take a subway, and you could go all the way to the tip of the Bronx for 275, you know?
Yeah.
And the fact that they're always like, oh, well, you know, we don't have a lot of, you know, we're our budget's short. I'm like, well, you know, like technically that distance is no different than how far I'm going. I pay $35 round trip. You could easily
Yeah.
make it $35, you know? Like
Yeah.
just have a way
Yeah.
of a mechanism of scanning in and scanning out and you know like an easy pass for traveling.
Well, and other countries do that. Like, you know, if you go across, like they do it as zone based, right? So if you go from an outer zone all the way into the inner zone and then back out, you're crossing over X amount of zones and you pay, you know, based on that, right? Like, um, you know, I mean, but this whole conversation reminds me too of like the doom and gloom apocalyptic talk around Uber when all the cab companies were like, oh my God, it's going to destroy us forever. And then, you know, the tech guys in California are like, oh, yeah, you know, we're disrupting everything. We're destroying all these things. Like, we're so powerful. But I tell you, I go to New York City frequently. There's still a shitload of yellow cabs. Like, as disruptive as it was, it didn't like overnight replace everything. Shit's still
It
out
never
there.
will. It never will. Like it, I will say the benefit was that it made the cab companies who were king in New York City have to say, all right, well, maybe we have to get rid of this body odor smell and maybe we shouldn't have our cab.
Yeah, they had to compete a little bit. Exactly. And
They had to
improve their
try a little bit
product.
more. And even the city of New York, like they're not like you're zoned out with Uber. Like you can't go to the airport if you're in Long Island, but you
Right.
can only stay in New York City or whatever the hell it is. Like I'll be honest, I would never want to drive my personal car, fucking city anything.
Oh my God, no.
No, no. But it did decrease the value of that's the only thing they cared about with medallion because the
Right.
medallion was like I forget what it was, $1 million and they
Oh
had
my God, it's fucking ridiculous.
indenture
Yeah.
servitude and then it's like well it's not worth that anymore. It's like yeah but that stuff can change and was it ever really valued at that or was it just artificially inflated because of
Right.
the demand, you know, like there's only X amount that you give out. I remember there's one guy, I forget what his name is. He invested in a ton of the medallions and just had them readily available and thought that as they keep increasing in price, he would use that as kind of like cash fund to have. And I'm like, is that
Yeah.
even the right thing to do? You know, like
Yeah, there's something a little extorty about it.
a little,
You
yeah.
know?
Oh, you know, we touch on technology a lot, and like at the end of the day, you have to embrace it for what it is. There's been all these waves of the sky is falling scenarios that have happened throughout all of history, right? You sit there,
Right.
and you're like, to your point before, like the guy who's like you know, he's got the horse and cart, and he's like, I don't know if this car thing will ever stick. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Now's the
Yeah.
time to double down in horse and buggies. Now's the time.
Right, right.
And
Exactly.
and then certain things stick, but it makes life easier, it makes life better, but then it opens up a whole new world, right? Like then you're like, okay, now we have cars. Now we can get from point A to point B a lot faster. Oh, guess what? Now we could ship things. Now it open up the trucking industry. Like there's a lot more that can be
Yeah.
done. So it has its tentacles and it branches out. So like AI shouldn't be the end all be all, as long as it's not actually physically replacing all the humans. It's scary in this scenario because you don't know what that could look like. You hope for the best, but
Right.
no, you know.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at it on a macro level, I think it's easy to feel less scared about it because a lot of this, as we were saying, a lot of this doom and gloom around different technological advancements, this is a common refrain. This is, been on repeat the last 100 years as we've been doing more and more competitive shit. Technology is advancing. And in most cases, the net of it is that we just ridiculously increase productivity. So, like, it reminds me of even talking about coal miners in West Virginia. And when they tried to like do all these things to bring coal mining back to West Virginia, they ended up not increasing the number of coal miners that work there very much, but the output of coal went through the roof because the technology that they were applying to the whole system of it was so much better. Like, all these machines they could use to shave the coal off the walls instead of having some dude with a pickaxe and, trying to fucking do it by hand. Like, so it's not surprising that the productivity went way up. And when you think about it in the macro level, that's great. Like society benefited, like things were good. I think where it gets concerning is when you start thinking about it on the micro level, like, okay, what happened to those coal miners? Like they're still sitting there, addicted to meth because they can't find a job, right? So, I mean, as the
All these lung diseases and shit.
right, like as the generations advance, like their children are probably going to be brought up in a world with this technology that, that doesn't leave them behind because they'll have started with it. But, it just shows how important it is for you to be flexible and capable of learning and, doing more with yourself than just the one thing that you figured out, to start with.
So one of the things we talked about was the lack of innovation, right? And I was like, you know what? Let me look up innovation and what that looks like by decade. And with our friends at, ChatGPT, I said it basically said it's difficult to
Want to
name it.
buy an ad,
Yeah, yeah,
ChatGPT?
yeah. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Right.
It's difficult to define a single biggest innovation by decade, as
Mhm.
technology evolves continuously and impacts vary. However, here's a look at some of the most impactful innovations by decade, right? So it goes all the way back to the 1940s. And as I was reading through it, I started thinking, I was like, these are monumental like and drastic changes to the world we live in.
Mhm.
But to what we were just discussing, it's had a positive impact not only to our daily lives, but also has created industries upon industries that are multi-billion dollar industries that have developed. So like maybe there's some hope for the future. So
Yeah.
I'm going to go through it. We can kind of chat a little bit, but 1940s, the transistor. 1947 revolutionized electronics by replacing bulky vacuum tubes with smaller, more efficient devices. So that was the 1940s.
I don't even
So
know what that is.
with that,
Things have advanced so much that I don't even know what the fuck that is.
I think the transistor has to do with like radios, televisions. I think it was the way that
Yeah, like it's something with electricity. I know. I'm just saying it's kind of the funny thing. There are so many transistors and so many things we use now, I'm sure, but it was a big deal then, but now I'm like, I don't even know what the fuck that is.
well, it's the 1940s, so
Right.
actually, just for fun, it says a transistor is a tiny electrical component that can control the flow of electricity in a circuit. It acts like a switch or an amplifier, depending on how it's used. They're building blocks for all modern electronics used in computers, smartphones, radios, and television. Almost every electrical device. So I'd say that's pretty innovative.
Makes sense.
That's pretty good. Okay,
I
so
use a lot of electrical devices, so
I using one right now.
right.
Thank you, 1940s.
Right.
1950s is microchips. 1958 allowed for the miniaturization of electronic circuits, paving the way for more powerful and compact devices. And we know where that's going. There's a whole shit ton of industries based on microchips and all
Sure.
that.
Computers used to be a warehouse. Now they're in your pocket.
That's true. That's true. 1960s, the internet. 1969 emerged as a network of networks, connecting researchers and
I don't think I heard you say Al Gore.
Yeah, well,
I thought he invented it.
he did. He did. He's personally invented it.
Ah.
He drew it on a napkin. That was the problem.
Ah.
Said researchers and paving the way for the modern internet. Yeah, obviously. 1970s, personal computers, early 1970s, started to become more accessible, changing how people work and stored information. 1980s, the Apple.
Replacing secretaries with PCs, man. That was a big
Well,
part of the
the whole
1970s.
typewriter industry too, right? Like,
Yeah.
think about I remember watching Mad Men, and you sit there and they would pack up their whole fucking typewriter in this
Yeah.
bag that they would carry around. It's like we were saying, it's you're getting rid of something, like you're taking something and making it better, and then it creates all these industries associated with it, which is
Right.
like the internet is a perfect example of, like, everybody's like, oh, AI, it's screwing everything up. I'm like, yeah, but the 1960s paved the way for generations upon generations of making more, or making it.
Yeah.
So
Imagine what an office was in the 1970s. You'd walk in, there would be the whole typist pool of like all these different people. And, there was large arguments for a long time about how, all those people lost their jobs because of these personal computers. But like, is anyone really saying today, like, you know what, we should get rid of all the PCs and go back to having, women just sit in typist pools?
oh, dude,
you know?
smoke filled the air, liquor everywhere.
Yeah. I mean, that doesn't sound so bad, but you know what I mean?
You numb the pain. Yeah, yeah.
Right.
I bet you people back then were just having a grand old time, no,
Right? Three
no
martini
outside influence.
lunch. Yeah.
I always think it's crazy because you would leave and it'd be like, oh, I'm 8 o'clock in the morning, going to the office, get home at 8 at night, and nobody had a clue what the fuck went on all day. Like, it
Yep.
was like you live in two separate lives. It's unbelievable.
Yep.
Okay, 1980s, the Apple Macintosh, 1984, obviously it's a commercial based. Introduce a user-friendly graphical interface, making computers more approachable for the general public. That's a good one. Now,
I think
1990.
that is actually a great example of how first they create the technology and then they make it accessible. And that part where you make it accessible, I think is very underrated. It reminds me of I was reading this thing about how they compared Henry Ford to the guy that ultimately took over GM. His name was Alfred P. Sloan. And they were like, Henry Ford did all this cool shit by making it so that it was easy to create cars. So it was cheaper and easier, and you could make make a better mousetrap, right? Like you make them cheaper and quicker. Alfred P. Sloan, what he came up with is he created all the brands of GM so that throughout your life, you, number one, had a different one every single year. He would change the design every year so that you kept up with the Joneses. Like he kind of created that concept. And then like beyond that, he made it so like, okay, early in your life you want a Chevy, and then you want to graduate to a Pontiac sports car or a Buick, and then by the time you're retiring you get a Cadillac. And that story is what made cars like kind of part of our lives. Despite how cool they were before.
No, it's interesting. I didn't even know that. I know, obviously, I know Henry Ford's story. I think everybody about that in the assembly line.
Right.
But that's interesting with Alfred P. Sloan. So, like, that's the reason why
and GM was way bigger than Ford. Like when he came into play, GM like crushed Ford. They were 3 or 4 times as big for like 20 or 30 years.
Wow.
Because of that.
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense as to why there's so many brands that under one umbrella. And I never understood. I'm not a car guy by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah.
But now I'm understanding, like, yeah, you have your entry level, then you move your way up, and you want to kind of get to that,
It was this whole story of the American dream, like as told through car buying.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that's really interesting. Never thought of it that way. I mean, it's probably different now because everybody's just gobbling each other up. So like, it's probably not as linear. But
oh yeah, you look at it now, and now it's kind of like you have almost more like political factions and things involved. Like, if you're a car person today, even if you're more conservative, you're probably starting out with a Ford Maverick and then graduating, someday to the Ford F-150 King Ranch, but you're not graduating to like a Lincoln or like a a fancy luxury car. Which is a big change from when he was trying to, do his thing with the different brands.
Yeah, and that's good. Yeah, because now I feel like they create cars based on the very niche demographic, right? Like,
right.
You have the pickup truck, which is always like traditional blue collar America, but now everybody wants a pickup truck. I want one just for functionality. I'm just like,
sure.
I could haul shit anywhere I need to. I don't need one for $150,000, but if I could
Right.
afford it, I would,
Yeah.
but it's interesting because I feel like like we talked about it before, like the truck industry is a prime example of
Hmm.
where those the you look at that and you're like, oh, that's some guy just like chewing dip and
Yeah.
working on the fields, and you're like, first off, farmers in America are like multimillionaires,
Oh my God. Yeah, absolutely.
and yeah, and B, the perception is like, that truck is worth more than a Mercedes or BMW or insert whatever luxury you want. But
Yeah, hell yeah. You can get an entry level fucking Lexus or a Cadillac for like 25, 30 grand.
yeah. Okay, so 1990s, back to this one real quick.
Mhm.
1990s, the biggest innovation was the World Wide Web. Made the internet more accessible to everyone with the introduction of web browsers leading to the dot-com boom, which we all know what happened there. But the survivors of the dot-com boom really paved the way for the world we live in today. So, I mean, there is just
Yeah.
an infinite amount of everything that's come out. And
Well,
I
and
guess the 90s are pretty spectacular.
same deal, right? Like, look at that again. So you got microchips in 1958, PCs in the 70s, and then it's not till the 80s that Macintosh comes out and makes it so that these computers that have been around for decades are finally accessible, right? Then you got the internet, came out in the 60s. We've had it to some capacity for decades, and it's not until people come out with these web browsers that all of a sudden they're like, oh shit, this internet thing, that's kind of cool, and then it makes it accessible and it blows up. It's like the invention part is not always the big part. Often it's the how do you get it to be accessible to people part that makes it really blow up.
Yeah, I think that's the toughest part in all of it. Like you have to get it to the masses in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
So it's great that, and think about along the way, you talk about from the 1940s and these alone, right? And how many companies probably had to fail in order for others to succeed and learn from the differences there, like you
Oh yeah.
think about Macintosh and Xerox came out with like they had the mouse and they had
Mhm.
all that, and it's like, and everybody's like, it's just stupid, nobody wants any of this shit, and then now it's everyday use, and
There's tremendous trade-offs that you have to make. There are just certain things you can't make electrons do. There are certain things you can't make plastic do or glass do. And as you get into, or factories do, or robots do, is that it's through the team, through that group of incredibly talented people bumping up against each other, having arguments, having fights sometimes, making some noise, and working together, they polish each other. And they polish the ideas, and what comes out are these really beautiful stones.
As per my last podcast with your host, Greg and Eric.
That's what the money is for!